Good afternoon and welcome to the LUNGLIFE investor presentation. Throughout this recorded presentation, investors will be in listen-only mode. Questions are encouraged and can be submitted at any time via the Q&A tab situated on the right-hand corner of your screen. Simply type in your questions and press send. The company may not be in a position to answer every question it receives during the meeting itself. However, the company will review all questions submitted today and publish responses where it is appropriate to do so. Before we begin, I'd like to submit the following poll. I'd now like to hand you over to Paul Pagino, CEO. Good afternoon to you, sir.
Good afternoon, thank you, and welcome everybody. I'm Paul Pagano, CEO of the company, and I'm joined by David Anderson, Chief Financial Officer. At LungLife, we're very much focused on the early detection of lung cancer from a simple blood draw. As you may recall from prior updates, we are very focused on the pivotal validation study for our LUNG-LB technology. And as we start to begin to approach the conclusion of that validation study, we would like to share with you our vision of commercializing the test and how we intend on getting it into the hands of people who need it most. So in addition to our company update and results reporting, we're going to be sharing our initial rollout plans for the LUNG-LB technology. Just as a reminder, we're focused on one niche aspect of early lung cancer detection, and that's the indeterminate lung nodule. These are spots on the lung that are found by CT scan, which is a three-dimensional X-ray of the chest. The tools right now that are available to doctors are inadequate. They lead to long delays in treatment, significant harms, and significant costs as well. We'll go into more detail on this later on, but we expect to show that in our pivotal validation study that the LUNG-LB test is going to be a useful tool in helping stratify which pathway patients should take, reducing delays in treatment, unnecessary harms, and healthcare costs as well. So we'd like to share with you some of the milestones that we hit in 2022, and they fall into a few different buckets. The first is on our pivotal validation study. If you recall from last year, we had about 6 hospitals that were activating and enrolling patients for the LUNG-LB trial. By the end of this year, we had 13 sites, and now we're actually up to 14 that are activated and enrolling, including an additional 3 from the Veterans Affairs hospitals. By way of a reminder, veterans are thought to be at higher risk for lung cancer because of what they're exposed to during military service. And so it was very important to LungLife to include veterans in our study, and I'm pleased to say that roughly half of our hospitals are Veterans Affairs hospitals. We have 2 additional hospitals that we'll be looking to activate in the next couple of weeks. And then we're very much focused on continuing enrollment, which we expect should be completed in the next 2 to 3 months. And then when typically about 3 to 4 months after the last patient is enrolled, we expect to have the data in hand, ready to analyze and have the study readout shortly thereafter. On the regulatory side, our last update, we were pleased to announce that we received a CLEP permit from the New York State Department of Health. This was important for 2 things. One, it was validation of our first-in-class quality system, which is a strategic initiative here at LungLife. And second, we received approval of the technology itself. As a reminder, New York State came in and they looked at our raw and process data, and they approved the LUNG-LB test for commercial sale in the state of New York. Now, since then, we've initiated the application for the de novo submission to FDA. It is a very long process, so we wanted to get started on that as early as possible. But as a reminder, FDA is strictly voluntary. We have our CLIA license. The LUNG-LB test is qualified as a laboratory-developed test, or an LDT, and we plan on commercializing that ahead of FDA approval, because that approval could be a long timeline. But investors should be looking for that FDA submission after the data has been analyzed, so sometime towards the end of summer. Reimbursement, that was a very busy and exciting year for LungLife. Our PLA code was granted by the American Medical Association on January 1st, and that became activated in April. And because it was effective in April, we were able to present to the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Service, the largest public payer here in the United States, and made the rationale for LUNG-LB to be crosswalked to an existing price and an existing test on the clinical lab fee schedule. We were absolutely excited that CMS awarded us crosswalk in November of last year. That assigned a national price of $2,030 per test, and that means that the LUNG-LB test is on the clinical lab fee schedule January 1st of this year, approximately a year ahead of what we were anticipating. And then ongoing actions and reimbursement, we're looking to expand access to LUNG-LB by enrolling in state Medicaid programs. There are 50 states here in the United States. Initially, we're going to be focused on strategic states, particularly those states that are involved in our pivotal validation study. And then we're also going to be looking at building out our clinical utility study and early access program for LUNG-LB. We've seen quite a bit of interest for that. That's where we expect our first nominal revenues towards the end of this year is to come out of that program. And some additional points that we'd like to share. We've presented at a few conferences now, and pleased to say that LUNG-LB was accepted, and we're waiting with anticipation for its commercial launch at all of them. We've also submitted a couple of manuscripts for peer-reviewed publication, first on our pilot study, and then second on our health economic study. We're awaiting peer review comments from those, but investors should look out this year for those to be published. And then the last thing that I'll bring up as an update this year was our invitation to participate in the Early Detection Research Network. This is part of the National Cancer Institutes, and we were specifically onboarded by UCLA and Boston University, two of the leading healthcare institutions here in the United States. And importantly, they've been working on indeterminate nodules for over 20 years. Now, this EDRN is particularly important for LUNGLIFE for a few reasons. First, it's going to be the first independent validation of the LUNG-LB test, and that's something that will help tremendously with the commercialization effort. Second, the EDRN is comprised of 300 investigators across the United States whose sole focus is on the early detection of cancer. So this will help raise awareness of the LUNG-LB technology. And third, any new cell-based biomarkers that are identified in the partnership through UCLA or Boston University can be translated into our CLIA lab. The idea is they do that translational research, and then we can offer that biomarker in our CLIA lab here in Thousand Oaks, California, essentially expanding our product offering for early lung cancer detection. With respect to timelines, we had our first patient enrolled in our pivotal validation study of LUNG-LB in February of 2022. We've earmarked 12 to 18 months for completion, so we expect enrollment to be wrapped up in the next 2 to 3 months. On the regulatory side, I mentioned that we had started our application process for our de novo submission to the FDA. That is a long process. That's why we started early. And the idea is within a few months of completing enrollment, we should be able to lock our database, analyze the data, drop that into the application, off to the FDA it goes. Now that FDA review process can take a long time, but fortunately we can launch LUNG-LB test as a laboratory developed test immediately after the validation study, and that's what we intend on doing in our clinical utility studies and our early access program. That's where we'll offer the test in a commercial sense to physicians. We'll report on it, and then they can make decisions based on that test in the best interest of their patients. On reimbursement, again, busy year in 2022. Reimbursement, the stool comprised of 3 legs, code, price, and coverage. We have code, price, that timeline, as you can see by the graph, has been accelerated, so we're on the clinical lab fee schedule today. And that allows us to accelerate some of the other things that we're holding off on for 2024. For example, enrolling in state Medicaid programs, and we'll start working with private payers as well. Now, the third leg in that stool is the coverage process, and this does take the longest timeline. That's the LCD, or local coverage determination. That's where we'll work with our local Medicare contractor to help prove that the test is useful. It influences physician decision-making, helps avoid some of those unnecessary procedures and delays in treatment. And it's in that process of collecting data and utility studies that will be answering some of those questions and building the evidence for payers like Medicare, Medicaid, and commercial insurance plans. It's also in those utility studies where we expect first nominal revenues. Because we're reporting on the test, we'll be able to bill for it. We don't expect that all of the tests will be covered and paid for, but we do expect that some of them will be from the early adopter payer networks. And then with respect to the upcoming year, these are items that investors should be looking out for. So again, our pivotal study enrollment and results reporting enrollment to be wrapped up in the next 2 to 3 months. And then the results about 3 to 4 months after that. So we're ballparking around end of summer. That's when we'll be submitting to the FDA in a de novo application. And then once that's complete, we'll be looking to expand access to patients by working with key state Medicaid programs and then subsequently private payers in those states as well to start trying to get coverage for the LUNG-LV technology. A lot of what will drive those coverage discussions are data that we collect from our clinical utility studies, and we'll be looking to activate that very soon after our clinical validation study through our early access programs. And again, because we're reporting, we'll be able to bill on those tests, and that's where we expect some of those tests to be paid for in our first nominal revenues. Over to you, Dan.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. So 3 numbers from me. Cash balance at the end of December, 8 million. That gives us a runway through to mid-2024. Cash used in operations, 5.8, and EBITDA loss, excluding share-based payments, of 6.8. In terms of our spend, the biggest 2 items remain wages and salaries. Total cost in the year about 3.3. When you exclude the share-based payment bit, it's 2.7. We have 14 people full-time employed at the moment with 2 part-time. That will remain for the remainder of this year. And then the other big spend is on R&D expenditure, external R&D expenditure of about 1.9. We have been very cognizant, as you would expect during the year, of maintaining that balance between preserving cash whilst at the same time delivering on our objectives and our milestones. Thank you.
Thank you, David. So that concludes the update portion of the presentation and financial results reporting. Now we'd like to get into the plan on how we intend on rolling out the LUNG-LV technology. So just as a reminder, lung cancer is a big problem. It's the #1 cancer killer, not only in the United States, but worldwide. Around 230,000 people alone in the United States are going to be diagnosed just this year. And it accounts for just as many deaths as the next 3 leading causes of cancer. That's breast, prostate, and colorectal cancer. And the reason is that 80% of all lung cancers are diagnosed in late stage, where survival is very low. However, if you can detect lung cancer early, you can provide a cure to the individual. So the way that most lung cancers are identified early nowadays is through indeterminate lung nodules. There's about 1.5 million found in the US every year alone. Most of them are found by CT scan for what's called an incidental purpose, or a CT scan for another medically necessary reason. Even though there are a lot of Americans that are eligible to get a screen for lung cancer, a CT scan for early cancer detection, around 14.2 million, only about 6% of them actually get that CT scan. So the vast majority are coming from incidentally detected lung nodules. Now, as I mentioned, the early detection for lung cancer is centered around the CT scan and the indeterminate lung nodule. What these are, they're spots on the lung that are detected by the CT scan. It's a 3-dimensional X-ray of the chest. And they're called indeterminate because at the time of discovery, doctors aren't sure what they are. They could be scar tissue, it could be an infection, or it could be lung cancer. There's quite a bit of uncertainty in evaluating those indeterminate lung nodules. And the tools that are used to evaluate them are inadequate. There's the wait and see pathway, and that's where patients will come back in 3, 6, or 12 months to get another CT scan, see if that nodule has grown in size. In addition to the tremendous amount of anxiety that patients have while waiting to get that new CT scan, any delays in treatment can reduce your potential to have a cure. In fact, our partners from Mount Sinai just published in the Journal of Thoracic Oncology that a delay as short as 30 days can result in a 10% reduction in 5-year survival rate. So time is absolutely of the essence when evaluating lung nodules. The other option is to get a biopsy. And while results are available much more quickly, this pathway is associated with significant harms. In fact, 1 in 5 patients who get a lung biopsy will have an adverse event. We're talking collapsed lung, internal bleeding. There have even been individuals that have died as a result of receiving a lung biopsy. And when you find out that 40% of all lung biopsies return a no lung cancer diagnosis, you realize that we're putting a lot of people in harm's way for no good reason. In addition to those escalating harms, there are increasing costs as you progress through this pathway. CT scan comes in at around $200 a test, but as you escalate to biopsy, the costs jump to around $15,000. And should that biopsy result in an adverse event that requires hospitalization, the costs then soar to around $38,000. So what you end up with is a clinical care pathway that has more harms, more costs, and really more uncertainty than it does answers. And this is where we believe our LUNG-LB test can help. There are a few reasons that we'd like to share with you why we believe that LUNG-LB test is the answer. First is that the LUNG-LB test shows high performance and well-balanced performance. And second, that it's very simple to use. Now we know the technology has high balanced performance because we completed a 149 patient pilot study in 2021 with Mount Sinai and MD Anderson Cancer Center in patients with indeterminate lung nodules who are getting a biopsy. And we saw both strong sensitivity and specificity. And it was the reason that we initiated our pivotal study. Now the pivotal study does have risk because like the pilot study, we've designed it in such a way to be very rigorous. We wanted to include a lot of nodule types that are challenging to evaluate. In our pilot study, the majority of nodules are called intermediate risk nodules, and I'll get into that a little bit more in the future, but suffice to say they tend to be a little bit smaller and lack certain features that help clinicians predict whether or not it's cancer. So it's in this challenging group that we expect to have higher performance with the LUNG-LB test and where we expect it to be most beneficial. Other studies that are in lung nodules have not been so rigorous. And so while our study is more challenging, we feel that it's the right thing to do. And in fact, we feel that it might set the new bar in terms of performance of technologies like ours. There are a few key metrics that we'd like to share with our ongoing study that helps give us confidence that we are running it in the right way. First is that the average nodule size in our study is around 14 millimeters. And it tends to skew to the left, so we're enrolling a lot of patients with smaller nodules. This is important because it represents the earliest cancers and the most challenging nodules to detect and to evaluate. There's also a few other key demographics about patients that I'd like to share. First, the average age is around 67 years old. The majority of patients are in the Medicare population. Payers are going to like to see that study participants reflect those covered lives. So the fact that the majority are in Medicare is a good thing for LUNGLIFE. With respect to sex, we have around 50% participation from females, and then 25% of all enrollees come from underrepresented groups. And to put this into context, the National Lung Screening Trial, the biggest lung cancer study in the United States, only had 40% representation from females and 10% from underrepresented groups. This gives us confidence that the technology is going to perform across multiple patient types. The whole purpose of us doing this study is to give doctors confidence in the data. They want to see that the study population is relatable to their patients. So having these strong demographics is really important, and it's going to help us deploy this technology to those who need it most. Now, we also believe the LUNG-LB test is the answer because of its simplicity. It all starts off with a simple blood draw, and it uses technologies that are very familiar to physicians, circulating tumor cells and FISH. We spend a lot of time making sure that LUNG-LB was commercially viable, not only in terms of its performance, but also in physician experience. They have a lot to do. Oftentimes only they have 15 minutes with the patient. So making the test simple to use and easy to understand was paramount to adoption. We also didn't want to create any other barriers to adoption, like integrating it into standard routines. That was very important. What do I mean by this? Well, blood tests are already required ahead of biopsy. So what that means is if a doctor wants to perform a biopsy, they have to do a series of blood tests first. LUNG-LB is just another tube of blood. And we've been hearing a number of exciting things from key stakeholders. People are really excited that the test performs well in never smokers. Our competitors' test, for example, integrates smoking history and test performance, but we understand that never smokers are an increasing demographic in lung cancer. We're seeing that at higher and higher rates every single year. So making sure that it worked in never smokers was important to us, and it's important to patients. And physicians see the potential for the LUNG-LB test to accelerate time to diagnosis. Oftentimes, pulmonologists require evidence for a surgeon or an oncologist to treat that nodule, and they believe that the high positive predictive value of the LUNG-LB test is that evidence they need to get those people over the threshold. In cases like the EDRN, researchers want to understand how LUNG-LB can complement the current standard of care. So in those EDRN studies, they're looking at combining LUNG-LB tests with current imaging tests like CT scan and PET scan to give a comprehensive picture of patient health. So as mentioned before, lung cancer is the #1 cancer killer. And so as you can imagine, there is a significant opportunity to make a difference in this space with the LUNG-LB test. And while the market is large, we've identified a niche entry point through indeterminate lung nodules. The idea is to start small, prove the technology, and then expand to other indications and early detection from there on out. Now, most nodules that are detected nowadays fall into a couple of different buckets, either low or high risk. And generally, doctors know what to do here, right? If it's a low risk nodule, you're talking really small, 3 millimeters, no cancer history. You're not going to send that individual off to surgery. On the flip side, if you have a 4 centimeter mass, a doctor's not going to wait 6 months or 12 months to see if that mass is getting any bigger. They're going to go directly to biopsy or surgery. Where pulmonologists have the greatest challenge is with intermediate risk nodules. These tend to be smaller. The patients have an average smoking history and really lack other features that would indicate whether or not a nodule was truly cancer or more than likely benign. So we're going to be starting off in the intermediate risk group. We feel that this is where LUNG-LB is going to have the most benefit. And generally, the future for lung cancer early detection is bright. As I mentioned before, the eligibility for lung cancer screening has increased. In fact, it's nearly doubled to around 14 million people. And even though uptake today is low, there's been a year-over-year increase in the number of eligible patients actually getting that CT scan. So we're going to be ready to meet that increase in screening so that physicians are going to be armed with the LUNG-LB test anytime an indeterminate lung nodule is found. So how do we plan on commercializing the technology? Well, reimbursement is absolutely critical for this. It's how you get paid for your technology here in the United States, and it all starts off with CLIA. I'm very pleased to say that we've had our CLIA designation since 2019, so LUNG-LB is qualified as a laboratory developed test, so we can technically commercialize the LUNG-LB technology now. That means the US FDA is optional. However, we believe that the scientific rigor that's required to undergo an FDA study is going to provide confidence to all stakeholders, patients, physicians, and payers alike. Now, our plan is to launch as an LDT while we're waiting FDA approval, because oftentimes that's a long lead time. CLIA is also the first step in the reimbursement pathway. It allowed us to apply for our code, which was granted by the AMA earlier in 2022. And that subsequently allowed us to get a price for the technology. Again, that's a national price at $2,030 per test, assigned by Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Service. Now, the last leg in that stool is coverage. This is the longest timeline. It's where payers are looking for utility in your test. Does it influence physician decision-making? Does it help patients live longer, happier lives? That's what we're planning to understand in our clinical utility studies, and we're going to kick those off as soon as the validation study is complete. We've already identified some early adopter sites that are going to help us collect that data that will be so important in proving clinical utility to the payers. Now, rolling out a new technology in healthcare is going to take a methodical approach. You have to identify early adopter sites, people that are interested in new technology. Ensure they have the proper support, especially in the early days. Because the data that you collect in these clinical utility study sites are going to support payer coverage determinations. It's probably no surprise that we're looking towards our clinical validation sites to participate in utility studies. They're going to be familiar with the technology. They're familiar with our company and our personnel. They trust us, and so they can make an informed decision about whether or not they'd like to continue. I visited a lot of our clinical study sites in January, and I'm pleased to say that we have verbal interest in all of them in continuing LUNG-LB in utility studies should the validation study be successful. Another area of focus for us is going to be on peer-reviewed publications. This includes the validation study and utility studies, as well as health economics of LUNG-LB, which investors should look to be published later this year. All of those are going to be help with payers making coverage decisions for the technology. Longer term for LUNG-LB, we're looking to expand in different indications. So I mentioned intermediate risk nodules. We believe that LUNG-LB does have legs in high and low risk nodules as well, potentially accelerating treatments there. Additionally, there's some early data that we have that suggests that LUNG-LB could potentially be configured to identify other cancer types outside of lung cancer. There's more work to be done, but that's a very promising area for the technology and one that LungLife is interested in exploring. Also, in terms of commercialization, while the major focus is going to be here in the United States first, there's an opportunity to expand through distributorships in other countries that are interested in early detection. So just by way of reminder, in 2023, we have a lot of upcoming milestones that investors should be looking for. Enrollment for the pivotal study to be wrapped up in the next 2 to 3 months, with results to come out towards the end of summer. And those will inform, of course, the FDA de novo submission. We plan on launching the test as an LDT ahead of FDA approval, and that's going to be through our clinical utility study sites in our early access program. And it's the data that we collect in that early access program that's going to help expand access to LUNG-LB through coverage with Medicaid and private payers, and eventually through Medicare. It's also through that early access program that we expect to bill for the technology. Again, we don't expect all of those bills to be paid for, but we do expect to receive some nominal revenues from those first invoices. So that concludes our presentation. I would like to thank everybody for their time, and we can open it up to questions.
Paul, David, thank you very much for your presentation this afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, please do continue to submit your questions using the Q&A tab situated on the top right-hand corner of your screen. Just while the company take a few moments to review those questions submitted today, I'd like to remind you that a recording of this presentation, along with a copy of the slides and the published Q&A, can be accessed via your investor dashboard. As you can see, we have received a number of questions throughout today's presentation. Paul, could I please ask you to read out the questions and give responses where appropriate to do so, and I'll pick up from you at the end.
Wonderful. So the first question is, we have a board member, James McCullough, who's also CEO of Renalytics. Have you been able to use Apply's experience from there? Yes, actually, both James McCullough and Sarah Barrington have been in this diagnostic space for well over 20 years. And so David and I had the opportunity to learn from them, bounce ideas off them. They've been absolutely tremendous in helping us with specifically the commercialization aspects of the LUNG-LB test, early market access with applying for Medicaid programs and helping out with that strategy. So it's been wonderful having them on the board. Somehow I just removed all of the questions. There we go.
There you go.
Okay. The other question, Polarian Imaging has just gotten FDA approval for lung imaging using polarized xenon. The technology gives a much more detailed view of the lungs. Does this represent a risk to the market size by reducing the number of indeterminate lung nodules? Yes, I did notice that they do have that technology for helping stratify. Really, it's a lot more of lung function, less of indeterminate lung nodules, so they can look at flow in the lungs. That's really important for diseases like COPD and emphysema. I actually look at what Polarian is doing as an opportunity, because the better those are diagnosed, the more physicians will know to look out for lung cancer in those individuals, because COPD, emphysema, and pulmonary fibrosis, all which have to do with flow of air in and out of the lungs, are leading risk factors for lung cancer. So while that hyperpolarized xenon is helpful in looking at airflow, it isn't necessarily helpful in saying this person has cancer or this person doesn't have cancer. It will tell the physician, I need to watch this person more closely for an indeterminate lung nodule. So that's potentially an opportunity for more nodules to be found. And again, a bigger potential for lung LB to be utilized. Another question is about visibility in terms of the market. I think something that's really important for LungLife is with our key partnerships. Of course, the clinical validation sites, it's no surprise that we chose those sites because they're leading hospitals across the United States. The other thing that I'll touch on is with the Early Detection Research Network, because this does help with visibility. The network comprised of 300 individuals who are solely focused on the early detection of cancer. It's an incredibly prestigious organization filled with key opinion leaders and people that want to adopt technologies like LungLife's earlier on because they see the potential of it in helping with early detection. So in terms of market visibility, I think working with the right partners and doing what we're doing now is going to help get the word out for LungLife and the lung LB test.
I'll take this one. You state pricing $2,000. If you make a 50% margin and assume 17,000 tests, is it right to think the business would make circa $10 million profit? Assuming the current cost base was circa $7 million, is this the right way to look at the opportunity? It is the right way to look at the opportunity in terms of the maths, if you will. Our gross margin with labor, without labor costs, is slightly higher than 50%. But in terms of the maths there, yes, that's the right way to look at it. But the numbers in terms of the tests would be less than 17,000 to make that kind of return because the margin is somewhat higher.
Yeah, and the last question we have that is would the right partner help accelerate the opportunity? And the answer is, of course. We'd always be looking for a way to get the lung LB technology out to those who need it in the quickest and most accurate fashion possible. And I think we have a lot of the right partners through, especially with Mount Sinai. They've developed a Centers of Excellence program for thoracic oncology, and they've really recruited a lot of world-renowned experts in early lung cancer detection. We're partnered with two physicians there, Doctors Claudia Henschke and David Yankelevitz, who are at the forefront of lung cancer screening and nodule evaluation. So I think partnering with them is a great way to get the technology out there and help, again, get this out to patients that are at risk for lung cancer. And we continue to look for other partnerships as well that can help in that area.
Paul, David, thank you. And I think you have addressed all those questions you can from investors. And of course, the company will review all questions submitted today, and we will publish those responses on the Investor Meet Company platform. Before redirecting investors to provide you with their feedback, which I know is particularly important to the company, Paul, could I please just ask you for a few closing comments?
Yeah, just wanted to say thank you to everyone that's been following the LungLife story and for listening in today. Our vision at LungLife is to flip the 80-20 rule. We want to, in the future, have 80% of lung cancers detected early when you can effectuate cure. That's the most important thing to us. I've been doing lung cancer research for well over 13 years now. I find it very fortunate that I'm able to continue in this field. And in particular, I've been working on indeterminate nodules during that time and haven't found a technology that shows more promise than the lung LB test. So we're very hopeful in the results coming out soon for our validation study. So please stay tuned. Again, thank you very much for your time and attention.
Paul, David, thank you for updating investors today. Could I please ask investors not to close this session, as you'll now be automatically redirected to provide your feedback in order that the management team can better understand your views and expectations. This will only take a few moments to complete and I'm sure will be greatly valued by the company. On behalf of the management team of LungLife, we'd like to thank you for attending today's presentation. Good afternoon to you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.